Welcome to Scene, where the art world meets the real world. Every 2 weeks, we sit down with emerging and established artists to offer a genuine glimpse into their lives and minds, all in an authentic and totally straightforward manner. I'm Carrie Scott, your host. And with 2 decades of experience as a curator and art historian, I firmly believe in the transformative power of art, if it's seen. Okay, I gotta own up here. I was maybe more nervous about this interview with Naama Tsabar than any other. She's a boundary-pushing artist, performance artist, known for challenging conventions and pushing the limits of what art can be. Performance art is the avant-garde's wild frontier, blurring boundaries, often making us uncomfortable, and sometimes downright alienating. Think Yoko Ono, Carolee Schneemann, and Marina Abramović. These trailblazers shattered norms and expectations, going to places others dared not to tread. And let me tell you, Naama stands alongside these icons, bringing a fresh, urgent energy to performance art. Her work is raw, authentic, but also it's totally rock and roll. Forget the somber image of traditional performance art. Naama's playful, spontaneous approach, especially her signature style of dismantling electric guitars, invites viewers into a visceral, emotional experience. And in our interview, we totally got to geek out and dove into some of my own passions, Luce Irigaray, sound art. I wrote my master's thesis on it. And by the end, I was absolutely hooked. So get ready. I hope you're as inspired, challenged, and electrified by Naama as I was. She's a rock star. You ready to roll? Yeah. I was really worried that you were going to be like uber fucking serious, and that I was going to be like, right.
I'm a very serious person, but it's just life is so ridiculous.
True.
So why even attempt?
Why? Pretend otherwise. Okay. Well, listen, I'm going to do my best not to completely geek out.
Okay.
But given, my interest in sound art and whether that's a term we need or not, I want to kind of start there.
Yeah.
How do you describe yourself, your work, and what you do?
Yeah, it's a great question. I prefer not to describe myself. I really get uncomfortable with labels and kind of like fitting in to something very specific. I right away feel, but there's this, and this. And so, thinking of sound art, thinking of visual art, sculpture, performance, is it an instrument? Is it a sculpture? Is it a painting? Is it an amplifier? All of these things, for me, the interesting place of existence is that twilight moment where things kind of like weave into each other and are not super defined. And I think that's a truer way for me to define myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wouldn't define myself if I can. Yeah.
It makes sense. The work, though, makes noise.
Yeah.
Deliberately makes noise.
Well, the work doesn't make noise. Humans make the noise from the work. And so the work is there most of the time. And so it lends itself to being interacted with and activated by someone. And when that happens, then there's noise. There's sound that's like, it grows to be an instrument, or, you can talk about sound art at that point. But there's a whole kind of like existence and layer of existence that predates that noise. That's visual. And that is what draws you in. That is what we're talking about, a canon that is related to different art history. And, I think that shift when it becomes noise or sound, when you activate it, is a shift of some perception of what it is. And that is an interesting place for me to be, where it shifts.
Yeah.
The works are in transition constantly.
There's so much in that, right? And I think I have to geek out. Like, I've got to go back to this. But Herman von Helmholtz, who I'm guessing you know lots about, but right, the way that he looked at how we perceive things, insofar as our eyes, our nose, our mouth, those senses, our brain gets involved really quickly. But the way that we hear, our brain interprets late. Are you kind of adding this layer of sound to be a bit more universal?
No, I think it's not intentional, to be honest. The sound factor in my work, it's like something that is weaved very naturally into it and has to do with my own fantasies of like what art can be for us, rather than like kind of breaking it down to like, you know, delays in perception and kind of ideas of senses, and you know, working the senses, but rather more so this idea of you know, being able to play an artwork, you know, that's pretty magical to me. And the idea that anybody can do it, you know, a visitor to a gallery can come up to the work and do the thing that they're told never to do, and is touch the work. And at that point, there is an intimate relationship between that person's body and the object, even before the sound. And then you add sound to it, and then they become a performer, because then people hear the sound and they're looking. And so that person becomes part of that work. Their borders and the borders of the work weave into each other. And that is an extension of their position in the space that they take, the visitors themselves. So for me, it's like an empowering tool, and it's a fantastic idea of a way we can exist, you know, within like an exhibition realm, or in general, just with more, you know, yeah, that our action have reactions, and they're recorded into the space and to the history of the work, you know?
But so are they meant to be like playful in that way? Is there an element of like, you know, when you said it just there, you said the word play.
Yeah.
Is there a playfulness to it?
Yeah, I think there's playfulness. And I think it you know, it comes up against kind of their minimal look. I think there's something that looks, and I know, and I'm attracted to this kind of like, you know, this language that comes more from a minimalist aesthetic or a post-minimalist aesthetic as well. And then play comes in, and that's surprising within that context. And so, yeah, for sure, there's play. There's creation that also happens in the gallery, which is something that that is not often part of art exhibiting, you know? Like, you go to the studio, you make the work, there's magic, right? There's transformation. And then you take this thing and you put it on a wall for people to look at what has happened. But when you have something like this, when you have a work that can still happen, maybe not in the visual dimension, but sometimes even in the visual dimension.
Yeah, because that one
shifts. It's a shapeshifter. And so when you still have that ability to create and transform in the exhibition space, you know, that's playful. And that's what we all do in the studio. We play.
How did these come into being? Right? They're not an expected. They're not expected forms. You know, they're things that have meshed together. There's a piece over your shoulder that's two guitars.
Yeah.
Like, how did you even end up here?
Yeah, it's a great question. I love music. It's like my first love is music. And like my second love, I would say maybe my true love is art. It just, you know, I came upon it a bit later in life, but music was always part of my surrounding. And I grew up playing instruments and performing in bands, with bands. And as I was studying my undergrad, I was also playing in bands and performing. And so quite naturally, the two kind of like realms weaved into each other. And I'm not sure, I think for me, music and sound was always a place where I could be somewhere else. It transported me. I could be in my room in the town grew up in, the small town that was fucking boring, and hear this music and imagine myself elsewhere. It was a place of fantasy, and I think that kind of weaved naturally when I started sculpting into my art, and so I can't exactly pinpoint the moment it happened, but it happened way in the beginning of all the way back to like the early aughts, with my first works.
But then that's where I do think that this idea that like music does transcend, it does, more people engage with music, sadly, than engage with visual arts. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's truth to Helmholtz. He's been thrown out a million times. Yeah. I guess he was writing in like 18 whatever. But that there's something universal about that, and it speaks to us on a different level because of vibrations and what sound does to your body.
Sure.
And right, we all know those songs that you heard when you were like 18 and you know every single word.
Yeah.
Right. But I can't remember the password for my phone.
Right.
I think sound just operates in a different way.
Yeah, and I think you know the words. Growing up in Israel, you learned that you did not know the words at all. Those were not the right words. But yes, no, I get you. I understand what you're saying. There's something very like, it's a dent. It leaves a dent, an impression, right, into your being, into your existence. And it is vibration, and it is physical vibrations moving through your body. And so it transforms you. And it's like, sound is a very violent tool in the way that it's I think maybe the hardest thing to block out, right? Mm-hmm. It's the hardest thing to just like, we work so much with architecture and like all these elements to try to create these barriers between us and another source of sound. Mm. To not hear the outside, to not hear the neighbors, to not, hear that bass from that around the block, like club, but it just travels and it's very violent that way. And so it is in a way to also catch you. It's a trap. Or something that, maybe not a trap, but kind of like something that just, grabs a hold of you and is violent in that sense. And that is for sure also part of any work that has sound to it. And in relation to visuals, all you need to do is really close your eyes. It's all you need to do to block that out. So it is a very different sense. Yeah, it's true. And maybe that is why also growing up, it was so formative and so important for me.
Well, how do people react to your work? We were talking about, right, we both were talking about Janet Cardiff and her 40-part Martet. Yeah. And I said to you, I was like, I went there all the time and just cried.
Yeah.
And I did.
Yeah.
And so I'm interested. I hadn't experienced your work until we got in here.
Yeah.
And you moved that, and I did that. And then Andy played a piece at the back. He just plucked it, and I got goosebumps.
Yeah.
Is that kind of a typical?
Yeah. Sometimes. Yeah, I think there's a surprise element to the work, especially with sound, and especially when you can touch it, and especially when it changes shape, or changes something that you think is like a set thing because of its interaction with it. And so, yeah, it's I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know how people react to my work. I always wonder how it like reads, and like who are the people that touch the work, Who are the people that shy away? I know that certain places that I exhibit people is just like complete mayhem. You know, it's just like like the museums tell me that it's just nonstop sound coming from your, because the exhibition can be completely silent too. It just takes interaction to activate the sound element within it. And so, yeah, I think it depends. It changes from place to place, from viewers, from what the sound elicits. And I do know that when we perform on the works, there is a lot of emotions and perhaps some crying that happens. I think there's something that goes deep within those experiences, and especially I work with female identified and non-binary musicians, and we perform on these works, not on the stage. People surrounding us, we're quite compromised, and there's a lot of vulnerability within that, along with the sound and the compositions, and people really react to that emotionally.
Would you just describe really fundamentally kind of what those performances are like? Or, right, it's not, you're not a band playing a song.
Yeah.
Right? So what are the performances like?
Yeah. Yeah, the performances, they change from each place that I show. It depends on the body of work, but I put together usually a group of musicians, as I said, female identifying and non-binary, mostly made out of local musicians that I usually have never worked with before. Yeah. I like to work with musicians and also dancers, actually, with some of my work that come from different backgrounds. So classical, noise music, jazz, rock, pop, like the whole minimal music, it's the whole, the most diverse, the better. The more diverse, the better. And then we start this really intense, focused rehearsal period that's like 7 or 9 days. And you use the word play. Those first days of rehearsals are complete play. And so I come with exercises, and I give exercises, and there's a lot of exploration and play.
Exercises how? Like a bit of music? Or like...
No, just play two felts at the same time. One felt has to hold a beat, and the other tries to find a melody. Very, very simple, right?
So like learning the instrument.
Learning the instrument, what you can do with it, and how your body moves with it too, because it's giant. And I film everything. And then I go back after the third or fourth rehearsal, and I go through everything. I'm like, okay, this is interesting. This is interesting. This is interesting. Then I come to the next rehearsal, and I show it to everybody. And then we discuss. It's collaborative. And so this is what I think is interesting. Maybe they don't think it's interesting, or someone disagrees, If we all agree on a moment that's interesting, we're like, okay, let's elaborate on this moment. And that's how a moment within the larger composition is born. And so usually like in the fifth or sixth rehearsals, we have like 5 sections that are musical sections. Some of them are with singing. Some of them take the shape of a pop song, and we'll have lyrics in the future, for the performance. And some of them are completely just like this oceanic kind of like bowing that happens in all the work that just like envelops you. And some of them are super minimal, and some are painful to the ears. And they're very different, but these like sections are what are going to make up the larger composition. And then when we get to the end of the rehearsals, like maybe the 7th or 8th rehearsal, we're like, okay, how do these come together? And then we start working on the kind of like the movement from work to work, the musical elements, and what makes sense, what is first, what is second, what ends, what starts, all these questions that you have anyways with a show, like a musical show or an album. These are kind of things you ask when you work on these formats. And we do ask these questions when we write these performances. And by the end of it, we have a set performance that was not in existence 7 days before. And that's what we perform. And those performances are, as an experience, are very different from a musical performance. As I said, there's no stage, there's no central location, there's no central PA. And so...
no barrier.
And there's no barrier between the audience and us. And even more so, some of the works, at times I have a body of work that's called Melody of Certain Damage that's on the floor, broken pieces of guitars on the floor with strings attaching them. And so we're laying on the floor. We're in this very vulnerable, very compromised position, people hovering above us. And so part of the negotiations and the understanding and the articulation and the vocabulary that we work on in rehearsals is how do we move through these works and with these works from a place of power, even if it's, on the floor, like being really in a very compromised position.
Are they hard for you?
What are?
Like when you say, because in my head, as I was picturing, you painted a beautiful picture there of figures on a floor and people looking down on you. That is incredibly, when you use the word vulnerable.
Yeah.
So is it hard? Are those performances hard for you physically to do?
Kills my back. But no, but they are, they do though. It's amazing. It's amazing, what you need to do in those moments. You need to lean into even more vulnerability and more intimacy with the object. It's so empowering to do that and to be so exposed in a performative setting and to completely not apologize for it and to not even, and this is one thing I tell all the performers, and it's very important, and all the performances have this: never acknowledge the audience.
No.
Never acknowledge, never look at their eyes, never smile at anybody. They are a bystander of something that's happening and could have happened and might happen without them. It's almost like it's a ritual, perhaps. There's something tribal about it when we do these things. We also don't always see each other, we hear. And that's how we know we need to move to the next progression. Sometimes it's a large show, there's 100 people watching, and you need to get to the other side of the space. And there's 60 people in between you and the work you need to get to. How do you move through that? The sea will open. It just will. You just walk and you demand your space. And I think for me as a woman, that's a really empowering place and a very important place. And also thinking about the relationship and the power structures of the viewer, the view, the gaze, you, the performer, falling into expectations or or desires, other people's desires. I'd like to not meet any expectation if possible,
Yeah.
And so we really try to perform even though there's people there, not because there's people there. And so when we're on the floor, we're super gentle. There's this kind of vocabulary that I found with the broken guitars. I call it ghost play. And it's literally this kind of these almost unaudible sounds of us just moving against the strings where the microphone picks up the sound very softly. There has to be complete silence to hear it. And it's super intimate. And also, probably erotic, I can imagine. But also very vulnerable because we're on the floor with these broken pieces. And that is, for me, that's a very empowering moment, actually. Even though it's maybe the most vulnerable of it all because it's not composed. It's yeah. So I think it's an interesting relationship to reconsider with the audience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a thing that's a theme that's recurring in these conversations that has surprised me, and it's the physicality of making the work. And I don't know why it surprised me. You threw it away as a comment, like, oh, no, it hurts my back. But almost everyone we've spoken to recently has talked about how their bodies are like in the works that are made. And I think so often in the art world, we forget that part, like the physicality of making, and that this is hard, like it's hard to do.
Yeah.
When with the broken works, terrible way to refer to them.
Melody not certain damage. Okay. Yeah. The broken guitars.
Yeah. The damage of those, I kind of want to talk about.
Sure.
And the irreverence of breaking apart something that, is kind of holy. And
what is irreverence?
Irreverence. Like I don't give a shit.
Oh, yeah.
I will just break that and make it something else.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you?
Yeah, the process is, I have to be alone in the studio. It happens in the studio. I buy a guitar, a new one, usually. Sometimes I find them used, but usually it's a guitar I always wanted to own and could never afford as a younger person. And I tune it and I break it. And I break it. Usually I put some music on and some goggles and some gloves.
And do you smash it?
I smash it on this very floor we're sitting on. I put plastic underneath before, and then I smash it. And the way it breaks, after it breaks, I map it out. And that's what you see. So the work is kind of like that chance factor of the piece is kind of going wherever they're going or hitting the wall. It's also about the size of my studio, right? They hit the wall and they fall somewhere. Otherwise, maybe the works will be much bigger or smaller. And that all gets recorded into the final work. This kind of chance, Dadaistic, kind of like, and the break itself is, it usually takes a minute and a half. A guitar will often break between the body and the neck. It's a weak point. And so I know how to hold it to support that place. So it doesn't break there right away. So it's like more expressive and more beautiful and more kind of like broken. More broken. Yes. And then I go at it, but it depends also what guitar it is. Some guitars, usually the more expensive one, take longer to break because it's the wood that it's made out of. Some of these guitars that are cheaper are made out of basswood. It's a wood that really splinters and breaks. Some of the more expensive one are mahogany or maple or things that are just a bit more sturdy. There's all these things that are part of the material, even though it's an object that comes to my studio that like determines how it's gonna look at the end. And the breaking, it's a moment, and it's not. By all means, it's not the work. The breaking is not the work. The work starts after the break.
Explain that.
I just feel the guitar has been broken already, I don't really even need to break it. You know what I mean? It's like history has broken the guitar. The history of music has broken the guitar so many times. There's no really need to like break it again. That's why I feel like breaking a guitar now is like such a... it's such a removed act from the actual, from its origin.
Why? Because like people have broken so many guitars on stage?
Yeah, it's so embedded into the history already, and it's also just such a gendered history, and it's a history of it's a violent moment, on stage.
I was just thinking that I can only picture
only men. Like only now, you get the younger musicians that are breaking things, but that are women. But to be completely honest, I'm not interested. It's not interesting for me. For me, Melodies of Certain Damage, this body of work starts after the break. And it's about what do you do after a destructive moment? What do you do after a violent moment? What do you do with the pieces, And that for me is more interesting, more of our days, unfortunately. And something that I can think of as generative and maybe has some hope embedded in it as well. And eventually, through the insertion, through stabilizing it to the floor and inserting new strings, new microphones, new hardware, and becomes yet once again these pieces on the floor, this kind of landscape of debris becomes a playable instrument.
I don't want to use the word, it's like they're born again, because I feel that's really gendered, but that was the first thing that came to my mind. Born. That like you have birthed them into being, and then I was like, oh my God, my brain's doing that just automatically.
Yeah, I've never thought of that word in relation to these works, actually. I feel like, art is born, right? That's inherent to kind of like making something and creating it, right? But I think like with these works, actually, because they're already guitars, they're already instruments, they're objects, they're almost like more like, I would consider a ready-made. Obviously it's transformed to great extents and removed, and then removed back to its place in a way, But yeah, I've never thought about born. It's more like, I don't know. It's works for me that come from seeing over the past, 10, 15 years, just too much destruction around the world. And thinking about where we go from there after. I think that's the only place I feel I have power. I don't feel I have power to stop destruction. I think humanity is just so destructive. And so as an individual, I feel that's a place I feel a bit of control and power. It's like, okay, well, let me imagine what we can do after all this is broken, But also it's interesting because it's the breaking of the guitar is an interesting moment within art history as well. And relating it to Pete Townshend, but also Gustav Metzger, a Jewish-German artist, conceptual artist, autodestructive artist, that was Pete's teacher. And Gustav Metzger had this body of work. And he coined the term, I think he coined the term autodestructive art, where the destruction is the making. And so, there's always this myth of the first moment the guitar broke. And, one of the myths is that they were just like performing at a venue that had a really low ceiling, and he took the guitar off and it like hit the ceiling and it broke, and everybody was so wild about it that it just became a repeatable act. But most likely it has to do with his art education and connecting it to Gustav Metzger and autodestructive art, and which is art actually that, Gustav Metzger is a German Jew surviving World War II, that came from a place of war, from a place of destruction, this idea of destructing is making. And then that kind of gets folded into like a whole history of rock and roll. And then, of course, that it gets also kind of like layered onto masculinity and cathartic moment within a musical performance. All these things kind of get latched onto it. But the source is actually much closer to what I'm doing than the history that came after that source. Yeah.
We've touched on it a couple of times, but we haven't actually gone into it. I'd be interested to talk about gender politics, feminism, and how they are like being writ there, or put into the work.
Yeah.
we specifically.
Where do we start?
Luce Irigaray.
Yeah.
Maybe
we start there. Yeah. It is, we were off camera talking about The Sex Which Is Not One, this kind of super important book to both of us, I guess. And I think should be to everybody. And I think in a way it is. It's just like, it's embedded in so much other theory at this point. But yeah, that book kind of changed, like blew my mind, because it just articulated everything I was feeling. And this idea where we, as women, let me talk about myself as a woman. moving through this world, understand very deeply that it was not articulated for me. It was not made for me. My language that I use is a learned language that I use that was not written by people like me. The way we play instruments is inherent to also a male history of mastery, or the way we paint or make sculptures or talk about things, everything. And even like the way we think of our own, like, mental space, right? And our bodies. It's all defined by men, which is mind-blowing because what the fuck? Yeah. Then how can we start thinking for ourselves? And for me, that book really articulated that. And then with the work, I feel like the magical thing about them for me within that kind of like feminist realm, I mean, there's many things to talk about, who I work with, appropriating like gendered histories and flipping them and all these things. But the fact that the work can be an instrument and it has no mastery to it.
And played by anybody.
And it can be played by anybody. And it's a somewhat a canvas, an open canvas, or like a vocabulary needs to be thought of. And for that reason, I choose to work with female identifying, non-binary musicians. Because I'd like to, and even that is a failure, because, every musician has a history of mastery that they come with that is inherently male. And so we are always doomed to fail, I think, in our search for like something more true to our selves or our being or like our gender, There's I think it's always doomed to fail, but maybe we can just get a bit closer, And I think these works, for me, we get a bit closer to something that we can articulate for ourselves. Without, needing acceptance of others, falling into a canon of play, of mastery, of performance, kind of trying to break all these things apart to start building them back up to something that we can relate to. And is more true for our bodies and for me. I don't know.
Do you know Mina Loy's work? No. She was a modernist poet. I mean, she's so obscure, it's not funny. And the whole point of Scene was not to do this. I'm looking at the director who's like, here we go. But she was this modernist poet, and she was part of like the James Joyce set. Mm-hmm. She actually, as so many women did, then she just walked into an ocean, disappeared. But she published 2 books. One is called The Lost Lunar Baedeker, which is like a lost moon guidebook. And it's a bunch of poems, but she has a whole body of work that is ready-mades that have been documented but don't exist anymore. I just etched it as and I was reading her work when I first read Luce Irigaray's book, and my entire brain was like, and Mina's, it creates her own language. I mean, there's no grammar. It's all, and I was like, amazing. She is speaking something that I understand. Like, I inherently understand this. And then Luce's book, at the same time, I was like, wait, but that's what she's talking about. Yeah. This whole society has been set up with us as other.
Yeah, exactly. And then to that extent, I also think about Elizabeth Fraser, Cocteau Twins, I think that's her name, right?
Yeah.
And making up language to sound like something, but it's not. It has no meaning, but it's, I think that is, I mean, nobody talks about it, but I always, when I hear the Cocteau Twins, I'm like, it's brilliant. This just like sounds like language, but I do not understand what it says, and it's completely made up, but it's like, has the sounding of something that means something. And it's articulated by this woman, that's completely like, you understand that it's also like, there's an emotion attached to it, a way a word, which is not a word, is said or sung, and then it can repeat in another song. So it's a language. Yeah, it's a bit. I look forward to learning about Mina. I'll send you the book. You can go into the New York Public Library. There's some magazines that you can see. Yeah, you have to wear gloves. It's kind of fun.
Does all of your, this sounds really ridiculous, does all of your work make noise? The works on paper? No.
The works on paper are actually, they're studies for the bigger felts. So they're kind of like a process work.
Does that sculpture?
Yeah. That sculpture is one of the more performative. That sculpture is a left-handed and a right-handed guitar that I put together at the back. I bought 2 guitars, left hand, right hand, put together at the back, put maple in between them, refinished it, sent it to be chromed. And it's a sculpture, but actually I tour with this sometimes. I have like a collaborator that I work with regularly and have been performing with her for the last, while. Yeah, 15 years. Shit. It's been a while. And we have a composition for this work. And it's like this super intimate kind of imposed. The sculpture imposes a really intimate, close relationship between 2 musicians because you're holding it in between you, facing each other, and you're playing the part that's against the other person's body. So it's a negotiation of space, sound, and movement. It's a relationship piece. So yeah, definitely it plays and we perform on it. And it's very voyeuristic, I think, watching these performances because you're really just watching like the unfolding of a relationship and the different like subtleties of one. Yeah.
But not all of them make sound.
What?
But not all.
But not all of them make sound. I'm just trying to think. I mean, I have a whole body of work that's gaffer's tape, which is as a material I really have been using from early on in my career. I'm really interested in it. It's kind of like an underdog of a material, where it's.
What do you mean?
It's just a really utilitarian material used on stages in performance realms and also, in other industries. But on stages, it's black to fit in and not be visible, and it's there to stabilize cords and cables so people don't trip during. So it facilitates, something that a performance, but it's completely backstage, and it also is associated to backstage labor and all these things. But it's a beautiful material, and with my work, the shift is from the backstage to front stage with this material. And kind of making the surface that was meant to disappear be the surface of the work itself, represent itself. And so it's kind of, and also talk through that about maybe that invisible labor and those kind of like, I have that relationship with a few materials. I'm very interested in materials that are kind of like in the use of, and kind of insisting on them and taking them out of their use and rethinking their existence and place. Shoes is another one. I have a body of work with shoes, where these shoes exactly. Oh, look at these socks I'm wearing today. These shoes, unfortunate. These shoes are shoes that I wear in the studio and my everyday shoes. And I wear them out for like a year and a half, 2 years until they become uncomfortable, start breaking apart. And then I take them off and I put a metronome onto them and display their souls. And they're just like become a sculpture. And their title is like the first day I wore it and the last day I wore it. So it's like kind of a diary of my body moving through this object. All our bodies move through shoes. It's the underdog of the, of our wear, because it like takes the most like weight. It really, our body really like, the way we step how much we weigh, what foot we put on the ground first. Is it the front, the heel, the toe? All these things are recorded into this object through our movements with it through time. Like, I like to say that these works with the shoes are the sculptures I worked on the most. It's like 2 years of work,
But yeah, I'm so weirdly aware of my foot now in my shoe. I'm like, what's happening?
But it's I feel they share a similar rhetoric or kind of like existence prior to being a work as the gaffer state, for example, or even felt, be used an instrument as a silencer, as a deadener of sound, and the hidden components in between, like felt washers, on the, when you tune a piano, you take a long piece of felt and you weave it through all the strings you don't want to hear. And so it's kind of like this invisible tool in the use of, and making that be the surface that actually the sound vibrates through. So, yeah.
I don't know if you're going to like this.
Okay, try me.
Do you think that there's a political, or is there a political tone to your work?
Well, I think political these days is a word that we don't understand to its depth, where it's oversimplified. And we tend to just latch on to like one-sided kind of, but I think it is political in its essence, yeah. I mean, obviously when you talk about gender and gender politics, hence politics, that's part of the work, but also the place that us as individuals have in an institution is political. And the hierarchies and all these things are completely political. And the work tries to break that, tries to renegotiate your place, not my place. I'm the artist. Who cares? Whatever, right? But I already have my place. But your place is a visitor, is someone that has a body in this giant, like, overbearing space.
Cold, bright,
all of it,
whispery,
all of it. That's political. You have more space through these works. That's my hope. And you feel more at ease, you feel more intimate with the space and the object. And that is political. You having a sound, that is political. You interfering with something, that is political. And so, I think they're political. But maybe, anyways, I consider them to be such.
I'm glad. Yeah, I really am. And I hesitated to ask it because I do think we throw that word around.
Yeah.
And I think when you say, some people, have argued that there is, art is inherently political. It's all political.
Right.
But it's not. Yeah. I wouldn't agree with that statement.
Yeah.
But with your pieces, I think they are so deeply playing with power structure.
Yeah.
That there's a politic to that.
Yeah. And sometimes I've had the unfortunate experience of institutions purchasing my works and interactive works. Now, I must say, when we show these works, there's always a moment when I need to tell the curator to take a word out of the text, and it's always invites. The artist invites. It's like, I'm not inviting anybody. It's a platform that's there. Please don't tell people to touch it. They can touch it, but they must cross that border alone. And when they do so, they're rewarded. And that is the place of transformation. Because if you're told to do something, the expectation is set and you're just following instructions. But when you cross it as much, as alone as you can, you are the reward. Your transformation is bigger, But in any case, they can be interacted with and touched. And yeah, I've had institutions purchase my work and put stanchions in front of it so nobody can interact with it. It's like, what? I'm not dead yet. The work is still fine. It's a few years old. Definitely people can touch it. And that is really unfortunate. But also underlines like this power structure of like, also worth and how we value market value and how much it plays within our and within the art. It's not the art world, it's art. And that's the unfortunate thing that, it really, first of all, touching something decreases its worth. The fact that a person can imagine themselves touching something decreases its worth to them. That's really weird. To me, that's really weird.
That's an intense one for me, right? Because my relationship with art is like, keep it safe and keep it, don't hurt it, right? I mentioned the gloves a second ago with you, right? Even with the text.
Yeah.
So I imagine I would find it even harder.
Yeah.
Right. To let that go. So I kind of understand where the institution might be coming from. Like, oh, we need to preserve
history.
Yeah.
Right. But what if we think about art as a living thing? Then where does history play into that? What if we think about art that can still be transformed while on display? Where does history play into that? I think it's open questions, but I think they need to be articulated and re-answered because I think it's becoming irrelevant in many senses.
And that, right, nothing is fixed. This idea that...
And we die. We fucking die. Everything gets old.
Sure.
Even the history that we learn, these sculptures from from Roman times and stuff, they were not white. We know that now, but it's just like even our perception of history through art made is distorted. It was changed through time, It's a complex one, but I think it's one that we can maybe start to think as a factor in the way we how can I say consume art or value art, and we can have different answers to this question. We can let go of some of the dispositions that we're all born into. My thoughts, I wouldn't like to my work to be behind stanchions. If anybody's hearing, take down the stanchions. These stanchions out of there.
It's on the record now. Can't fake that.
Yeah, we'll see.
But do you have any massive thing you want to achieve for the work, or a place you want it to show, or a space you want it to be in?
Yeah, you're trying to tap into my ambitious self.
It's interesting. I don't know why I asked that. I think I want it to be somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Obviously there's institutions and shows that excite me because they're part of my kind of history growing up and appreciating art. I have a show coming up actually in a few weeks in the Hamburger Bahnhof, which is one of in a solo show juxtaposition next to Joseph Beuys. So great. A dream come true. Right? One of the institutions that really informed me growing up was accessible to me and blew my mind with an artist that is obviously really weaved already into what I, refer to in art history and fluxus and all these kind of notions. But I'm trying to think if there's something for the work that I would...
or a massive public piece.
Yeah.
Does that appeal?
In theory, yeah, for sure. That appeals. I'm still figuring out. Well, I think the public piece is a very wide term. There's outside public sculpture, there's inside public sculpture. With my work, I'm still articulating like what shape would it take outside, which is something that is ongoing. It's kind of a question, and I've attempted to do it a few times. I have performances that I've done, but are like time-based, on the High Line, at biennales and et cetera, but something that's like more object-based, stays outside, obviously, with my materiality. That's a real question mark, because the material is so important to the logic of the work. The felt is so important to the work. And so, yeah, it's a question, but it's definitely something that's on my mind. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that I can answer that right now with a clear view of a place and an occasion. Yeah,
That's okay.
yeah.
Last question.
I'd like to release more. I've released an album from one of our performances, and that's definitely something I like to do more of. Release more objects into like a music realm that come from an art realm. Kind of like do the shift into, yeah. Anyways, that's something that really excites me, and that's a public work in a way.
That is,
Yeah.
There, right? And some of my favorite artists, Rodney Graham,
Yeah.
Martin Creed,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. The albums. Yeah.
Their albums are great.
Yeah.
So yes, please do that.
Yeah.
Last question. I'm asking everybody this.
Okay.
I don't always admit that I'm asking everybody this, but I'm interested to know if you could own any one artwork. Doesn't matter what era it's from. Doesn't matter what it costs. What would it be?
I have cats.
You
I can
cats
I
with the
cannot
felts? You
put a
can't
felt
do
on my
this.
wall.
No.
No, not with my cats. Fuckers. Great question, but also off the top of my head, silence. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that just says silence. Maybe I have no answer for you. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
I do like that. I think it's an interesting. I've obviously asked myself the
Which
question.
one would you own?
Oh God, right? But it's
No, but serious.
bizarre. It's a piece I don't even actually like.
Oh, really?
It's just weirder. But I think I would have to because I've stared at it. It's a Fragonard painting that I used to see as a little girl. Oh, wow. And like it just holds this weight of, I don't know. I just I can't understand this work at all. I still can't understand it. And I can understand why I keep looking at it. It's the one where she's throwing her shoe off. And this all comes back to like fucking childhood, right? Like my dad used to drop me off at the Wallace collection in London because I had a client nearby and I didn't live with my dad. And so I'd go and see him and I don't think he knew what the fuck to do with me. And he'd sort of throw us into the Wallace and he'd go see the client. And then he'd come back an hour later when he was done with his meeting. And my elder brother and I would run around this museum. It was the 80s. That was fine.
Yeah.
And this one painting, right? It's kind of girly.
Yeah.
But then there's these two creepy figures. And like one is peeking out from the back. And so there's a whole gender politics.
Yeah.
So I understand that, but I have unpacked this stupid painting so many times in my head. And I do own an artwork by Joe Wardwell. He did an album cover of it. That's funny. I've just put that together. I'll send you a picture of it. And it's a front and back of this record that you can't play the music on the inside, but it's this Fragonard everything. Anyway, so yeah, that's probably what I would own.
That's what you
Maybe
would own.
to annoy me.
Or maybe it holds a weight that you haven't, as you said, unpacked yet, and you'd like to dive deeper.
Yeah.
For me, the problem with the question is one. It's like, if it had to be one, I'd rather have nothing. To be honest. It's too daunting.
It's too hard to pick.
What is your favorite song?
Yeah, no.
What song would you, if you were stranded on an island and had to listen to one song for the rest of your life?
It's hard.
It's a hard one. I'd rather not have any songs than,
I set myself the task of making a playlist of songs I wish I could listen to for the first time again.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
And then I made my kids listen to it.
That's special.
Crazy what and they're great songs.
How did they react?
Well, I told you one of them has picked up the guitar and now he's just trying to play them all badly.
Oh, no.
Sorry. He's definitely going to watch this.
Yeah.
No, he's not. He's great.
You'll get better.
Yeah, we'll get better. On that note, thank you.
Yeah.
This is awesome.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Scene Podcast. If you liked what you heard, I'd love it if you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to connect with us between episodes, follow us on Instagram at WatchSceneArt. I'm Carrie Scott, and I'll see you next time. Get it?